Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am Kausar Farooq Alvi. I welcome you to online classes and I hope you will be safe and sound at home. It will be our science lesson of week 3, day 1. Dear students, subtopic of chapter Discovering Plant is Ways of Pollination and the first subtopic is Pollination by Animals. In this chapter, you have learned so far pollination as first step in reproduction in flowering plants. Today, you will learn how many ways are there to pollinate a flower. By the end of the lesson, you will be able to describe the process of pollination by animals. To discover the type of flowers which are pollinated by wind. Give examples of both types of flowers. Find out the names of animal pollinators. Pollination by animals. Flowers that are pollinated by animals are colorful. Birds and insects are attracted to colorful petals. Such flowers have sticky pollens which stick to the bodies of pollinators, and when they fly from flower to flower, the pollens are transferred to stigmas of the other flowers. Examples of such pollinated flowers are marigold, roses, sunflower, and morning glory. Animal pollinators are bees, butterfly, fly, and birds. Pollination by wind. Wind-pollinated flowers are dull-colored and unscented. Petals of such flowers are small in size, and these flowers have tiny, light pollens. Therefore, they are easily carried by wind. Examples of such flowers are pine, dandelion, maple, and bush willow flower.
Chocolate comes from the cocoa tree. Midges pollinate the cocoa flowers, so if you like chocolate, you can thank these tiny flies. In fact, most of our fruit crops, grains, and vegetables need to be pollinated. It's no exaggeration to say our lives depend on pollinators. Let's learn more about pollination. Pollination is a key step in sexual reproduction among all flowering plants. The purpose of pollination is to allow individual plants to exchange genetic information. Flowering plants belong in the plant group of angiosperms. The majority of angiosperms are pollinated by animals. Other angiosperms, such as grasses and many species of trees, are wind-pollinated. Flowers are the sexual organs of plants. All flowers include the stamen or male organ and the pistil or female organ, which contains one or more carpels. The stamen produces pollen. Pollen is a fine powder comprised of pollen grains. Pollen is released from the anther, which is part of the stamen. Pollen contains male gametes. As a result of pollination, pollen is transported from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another. Pollination culminates in fertilization. When pollen grain arrives on the stigma at the top of the carpel, it stimulates formation of a pollen tube along the style. The pollen grain travels down the tube, eventually reaching the ovule at the base of the carpel. After the male gamete fertilizes the female gamete in the ovule, seed and fruit development begins. Because plants are not mobile, they must rely on various agents to carry out pollination. Plants can be pollinated in two ways: wind and animals. Wind-pollinated plants have small, dull flowers, lacking petals and nectar. Their pollen is shaken free and transported by the wind. These plants produce a large amount of pollen, gambling that some of it will make it to another flower. The more pollen that is produced, the more chance there is that the pollen will encounter a stigma belonging to another flower. Nearly all grasses are wind-pollinated. About 80% of flowering plants rely on animals to transfer pollen. Most of these animals are insects, including bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, and flies. Some vertebrates are also pollinators, notably hummingbirds and some other birds. Even some bats and small mammals are frequent pollinators. So what is in it for the animals? How do plants encourage pollinators? Most plants supply some form of reward, often some sort of food, like nectar within the flower. Other plants use deception to fool pollinators. This orchid, for example, mimics the female pheromone, making its flower irresistible to the male bee. The male bees try to mate with the orchid, inadvertently pollinating it. Once the animal arrives, the flower deposits the pollen on the visitor. Upon its visit to the next flower, the pollen is transferred to the stigma. Animals and plants are engaged in a mutualistic relationship. In most cases, both the plant and the animals benefit from their interaction. Animals get a reward, while the plant is able to pollinate.
Dear students, I hope the video will be helpful to you to understand the process of pollination. Now it's turn of written work. Question number 1. Write the characteristics of flowers pollinated by animals. Give 3 examples of animal pollinators. Question 2. What are characteristics of flowers pollinated by wind? Question 3. Name the flowers pollinated by wind. Question 4. Name the flowers pollinated by animals. Thank you very much.